While camping in the wild forests of Alaska, my son cold-bloodedly left me without food or equipment and said, "Bye, go meet the grizzly." He thought I would die of hunger or bear claws so he could take my inheritance. But when he returned home, I was already waiting there with a smile on my face. "I have a surprise for you," I said. "You won't believe what happened next." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The front door exploded open without warning. Mason stormed through, his hoodie damp from the Seattle drizzle, sneakers squeaking against my hardwood floor. "Dad, I need 5,000 right now." I froze by my desk, pen still in my hand from reviewing invoices. The aggressive edge in his voice hit me like a slap. This wasn't my son asking for help. This was someone making demands. "Mason, what? $5,000 tonight." He paced across my living room, hands clenched into fists. "I already transferred your monthly amount last week. The $3,000 barely covers my rent." His voice cracked with frustration. "You think that's enough? You think that covers everything?" My flannel shirt suddenly felt too tight. Grease still clung beneath my fingernails from working on Mrs. Chin's transmission earlier. I'd built these auto shops from nothing. Worked 18-hour days after Sarah died. Sacrificed everything to give him opportunities one never had. "Son, we've talked about this. You need to find steady work." "Work?" Mason spun around, his face flushed red. "Why should I work when you're sitting on all this money? When you control everything like some dictator?" The accusation stung. I straightened my shoulders, military posture kicking in. "I'm trying to teach you responsibility." "Responsibility?" He laughed bitterly. "You want to know about responsibility? After you die, I'll be an amazing master of your auto shops. I'll run them better than you ever did." The words hung in the air like poison. My chest tightened. The casual way he spoke about my death. The calculation behind his eyes. This wasn't grief or frustration talking. This was greed. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. 20 years of single parenting, of sacrificing, of hoping he'd become the man his mother would have been proud of, all crumbled in that moment. Mason must have seen the shock on my face. His expression shifted, realizing he'd revealed too much. Without another word, he spun toward the door. The slam echoed through the house like a gunshot. The family photo on the mantel rattled, Sarah's smiling face trembling behind the glass. I stood there motionless, watching it slowly settle back into place. The silence pressed against my ears. Outside, Mason's car engine roared to life and faded into the distance. I remained frozen by my desk, the pen still gripped in my white-knuckled hand, staring at that photo that refused to stop its gentle trembling. The next morning, I reached up to straighten the family photo. Sarah's face smiled back at me, young, radiant, holding 8-year-old Mason at his Little League game. The memory hit like a physical blow. Sarah's funeral. Mason, standing beside me in his only suit, 3 sizes too big, clutching my hand while I tried not to collapse. The mortgage on the first auto shop was 3 months behind. Sarah's medical bills had drained our savings. I'd promised her dying breath I'd take care of him, give him everything she couldn't. By Thursday, I found myself pulling out old photo albums. Each page revealed another sacrifice I'd forgotten. Mason's private school. Tuition, $40,000 per year, because the public schools weren't good enough for Sarah's son. His University of Washington education, complete with the dorm experience he demanded. The Honda Civic I bought him for graduation. $18,000 in cash because he refused anything used. I traced the edges of a picture from his 16th birthday. Even then, something was missing in his eyes. While other kids his age worked summer jobs, Mason spent his time gaming, living off the monthly allowances I justified as investment in his future. The progression was clear now, spread across decades of photographs. Every handout, every rescued failure, every crisis I'd solved with my checkbook had carved away pieces of his character. I thought I was being a good father. Instead, I'd created a stranger who calculated my death like a business transaction. Saturday evening, I sat in Sarah's old chair, the one I'd never had the heart to remove. She would have seen this coming. Sarah always understood people better than I did. She would have pushed him toward independence, made him earn every dollar. I failed her, I whispered, to the empty room. The realization settled into my bones like winter cold. I'd spent 20 years trying to buy Mason's love to compensate for the mother he'd lost. Every payment had been a bandage. Over my own guilt, my own inadequacy. I'd convinced myself that providing for him was the same as parenting him. Sunday morning, I returned the albums to their shelf and sat at my desk. My hands shook slightly as I reached for pen and paper. Military discipline steadied my breathing. I had to think clearly now, plan for possibilities I'd never wanted to consider. The blank page stared back at me, waiting for decisions I wasn't ready to make. 1 ring, 2 rings. My pen hovered over the legal documents I'd been drafting when the phone shattered the quiet. Mason's name glowed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Hello, son. Dad. Hey, how are you doing? His voice carried an artificial cheerfulness that set my teeth on edge. Too bright, too eager, like a salesman's opening pitch. I'm fine. This is unexpected after our conversation last week. Yeah, about that. Look, I've been thinking. I was way out of line and I want to make it right. The words came too fast, too practiced. Actually, I have a proposal. Something that could fix everything between us. I waited. Military training teaching me the value of silence. Let's go camping together in Alaska, Denali National Park. Just you and me. Like when I was a kid, remember? The suggestion hit me like whiplash. Mason hadn't shown interest in outdoor activities since high school. This is very sudden. I know. But here's the thing. My buddies canceled last minute, and I've got these tickets that are just going to waste. Everything's already paid for. Flights, camping gear, park permits. The whole package expires tomorrow if we don't use it. My grip tightened on the phone. The urgency felt manufactured, designed to prevent me from thinking too carefully. Mason, when have you ever organized camping trips? Come on, Dad. Remember when you taught me to read animal tracks, how to start a fire with wet wood? You always said the wilderness shows a man's true character. The reference to our shared past twisted something in my chest. Those had been good times before Sarah's death changed everything. Before I'd started solving problems with money instead of presents. This could be our chance to reconnect. Mason continued, his voice dropping to a more sincere register. To remember what we used to have, no distractions, no city stress, just father and son in God's country. I closed my eyes, war between hope and instinct raging in my chest. Every rational part of my brain screamed warning. The timing, the sudden enthusiasm, the convenient story about canceled friends, it all felt orchestrated. But underneath the suspicion lived a deeper pain. What if this was real? What if my son genuinely wanted to rebuild our relationship? The flights leave March 25th, Mason pressed. Seattle to Anchorage. Then we drive up to the park. 5 days in the wilderness, just like the old times. 5 days, I repeated slowly. Dad, please. These tickets are burning, and this might be our last chance to fix what's broken between us. The silence stretched between us. I stared down at the papers. On my desk, legal documents that could change everything. Precautions against possibilities I prayed would never materialize. All right, I heard myself say, let's do it. Really? That's fantastic. I'll text you the flight details. Meet me at SeaTac departure gate. This is going to be amazing, Dad. You'll see. The line went dead. I set the phone down carefully, my hand trembling slightly. Outside Seattle's eternal drizzle painted patterns on the window. I looked back at the documents spread across my desk, then at the pen in my hand. Hope and preparation. Both felt like betrayal. 3 days later, I folded the legal documents carefully and slipped them into my travel bag's inner pocket. The papers felt heavier than they should have, weighted with possibilities I'd never wanted to consider. Mason waited by gate C12, bouncing on his heels like an overeager teenager. His backpack looked brand new, tags still attached to the zippers. When he spotted me approaching, his grin stretched too wide. Dad, perfect timing. They just called for boarding. You seem excited. I studied his face, noting the slight twitch in his left eye. Military training had taught me to read nervous energy, distinguish genuine enthusiasm from performance. Why wouldn't I be father-son adventure in the last frontier? He shouldered his pack with obvious effort. When's the last time we did something like this? During the first flight, he chatted nonstop about wilderness photography in fresh air, consulting his phone more than seemed necessary for someone eager to disconnect. I shared stories from my Navy survival training. How to read weather patterns, identify edible plants, navigate without GPS. You really know all this stuff? Mason asked, scribbling notes on a napkin. 20 years in the service teaches you to be prepared for anything. Something flickered across his expression. Calculation masked as admiration. Our layover in Seattle stretched longer than expected. Mason excused himself 3 times, claiming bathroom breaks that lasted 20 minutes each. Through the terminal windows, I watched planes taxi against gray afternoon sky, Alaska growing closer with each passing hour. The final flight carried us over mountain ranges that looked like broken teeth against the horizon. Mason pressed his face to the window, but his reflection showed tension rather than wonder. Anchorage hit us with crisp air and the smell of snow. The rental car counter moved efficiently. Toyota. For a runner, extra insurance, chains for mountain roads. I handled the paperwork while Mason loaded our gear, favoring his right shoulder like something act. Outdoor supply store next, he announced, consulting his phone again. Need to grab a few extras. At Northern Exposure Outfitters, he insisted on specific items. High-powered flashlights, emergency flares, rope, more than seemed necessary for basic camping. The clerk, a weathered man with frostbitten scars, raised an eyebrow at our purchases. Planning to get lost out there. Just want to be prepared, Mason replied quickly. Highway 3 stretched before us, like a gray ribbon through endless forest. Mountains rose on both sides, snow-capped peaks catching the last daylight. Road signs warned about moose crossings and winter driving conditions. Beautiful country, I said, trying to bridge the silence that had settled between us. Yeah, really isolated. Mason's voice carried a strange satisfaction. Miles from anywhere. We stopped for gas and was as darkness began to fall. While I filled the tank, Mason wandered toward the convenience store. Through the fluorescent-lit windows, I watched him pull out his phone and dial. His posture changed, shoulders hunched, voice low and urgent. When he returned, I asked casually, "Everything all right? Saw you on the phone. Just checking weather. Conditions for tomorrow." He avoided my eyes. Storm system moving in, but should clear by morning. The lie came too easily. I checked the forecast myself. Clear skies predicted for the next 3 days. As we pulled back onto the highway, that familiar military unease settled in my gut. The same instinct that had kept me alive in hostile territory. Something was wrong. I just couldn't figure out what. 40 miles later, the gas station conversation still bothered me. So, what did the weather service actually say? Mason's grip tightened on the door handle. Possible snow flurries. Nothing major. The deflection confirmed my suspicions, but I kept my voice neutral. Good thing we packed extra layers. Denali's entrance appeared around a bend. Wooden signs announcing the park boundaries. Cabins scattered among towering spruce trees. The visitor center buzzed with early morning activity despite the season. Most tourists came in summer. March visitors were serious outdoorsmen or locals. Denali Lodge Motel looked exactly like the brochure photos Mason had shown me. Rustic log construction, rooms with names like Grizzly Den and Caribou Creek. The desk clerk, a young woman with calloused hands, processed our registration while Mason studied trail maps displayed on the wall. First time to Denali? She asked. For him. I nodded toward Mason. I've been to Alaska before, military exercises. Which trails are you considering? Mason stepped forward before I could answer. Planaka River backcountry route. We want the full wilderness experience. The clerk's expression shifted to concern. That's advanced terrain, very remote. Most people start with the shorter nature trails. We're experienced campers, Mason insisted, though his definition of experience apparently included 0 actual camping trips in the past decade. Park ranger. Jennifer Walsh looked like she'd stepped out of a recruitment poster, confident, capable, with the no-nonsense bearing of someone who dealt with every type of wilderness emergency. Her briefing room smelled of coffee and pine, walls covered with topographical maps and wildlife photos. Gentlemen, let's be clear about what you're undertaking. She spread a detailed map across the conference table. Planaka River route takes you 30 miles from the nearest ranger station. No cell coverage. No other campers this time of year. She pointed to red markers scattered across the map. Recent grizzly activity here, here, and here. 2 cubs were spotted last week, which means a protective mother nearby. We've had wolf pack sightings, and moose are unpredictable. During spring territory disputes, Mason leaned forward, studying the isolated sections with intense focus. What about emergency evacuation? Helicopter rescue? Weather permitting, could be days if conditions turn bad. Ranger Walsh's stern expression suggested she'd seen too many overconfident tourists become statistics. I have to ask, what's your combined wilderness experience? I answered honestly about my military background, while Mason mumbled vague references to camping with friends. The rare doubt was visible. Sir, with respect, this route isn't appropriate for beginners. We have excellent guided tours, shorter trails. We'll be fine. Mason interrupted. My father's practically a survival expert. After signing liability waivers and watching safety videos about bear encounters, we rented bear-resistant food containers and emergency beacons. I insisted on defensive rifle rental, a Remington 870 that felt familiar in my hands. You sure about that? Mason asked nervously. Alaska rule number 1. Never go unarmed in bear country. Our final stop involved programming GPS coordinates into our emergency beacon. Ranger Walsh demonstrated the activation sequence with professional precision. Push this button, hold for 5 seconds, and search. And rescue gets your exact location. But remember, in that back country, even with coordinates, rescue could take 12 to 18 hours minimum. Loading our packs into the truck, I felt that familiar pre-mission tension. Every detail screamed warning. The remote location, Mason's obvious inexperience, his strange insistence on maximum isolation. Still sure about this route? I asked. As we pulled away from the ranger station, Mason's smile looked forced. Absolutely. No turning back now, right? Dad. The phrase hit my ears wrong. Less encouragement, more finality. Through the rearview mirror, I watched the ranger station disappear behind forest. Our last connection to civilization, fading into wilderness that suddenly felt less like adventure and more like trap. The forest road narrowed until branches scraped our windows like skeletal fingers. My GPS showed our position, moving deeper into unmarked territory, past the last cell tower, beyond the final trail marker, into wilderness that had swallowed unprepared travelers before. We're officially off the grid now, I murmured, watching the signal bars disappear from my phone. Mason's laugh sounded hollow. Perfect. Just us and nature. Mile 23, Plonica, marked the end of drivable road. I parked beside weathered wooden posts that looked like grave markers in the dim afternoon light. Unloading our packs revealed the weight difference. Mine distributed efficiently from decades of military training. Mason's bulging awkwardly with gear he'd never tested. Jesus, this thing weighs a ton, he complained, struggling with the shoulder straps. Proper packing takes practice. I adjusted his weight distribution, noting how he winced when I touched his right shoulder. You hurt yourself. Old injury, nothing serious. The trail wound through dense spruce forest wear. Afternoon sun barely penetrated. Moss-covered logs created natural obstacles, and small streams required careful stepping stone navigation. Wildlife signs appeared immediately. Massive moose tracks pressed into muddy patches. Eagle cries echoing from somewhere above the canopy, and the distant howling that meant wolves. You hear that? Mason stopped suddenly, face pale. The wolf pack probably 5 miles away. I kept walking, but noticed his nervousness had nothing to do with wildlife appreciation. For someone who'd insisted on this remote route, he seemed genuinely frightened by its realities. 3 hours of hiking brought us to a clearing beside a Russian creek, perfect campsite, with flat ground, fresh water, and clear sight lines in all directions. Military habits kicked in as I surveyed defensive positions and escape routes, while Mason sat heavily on a fallen log. How much farther do we go? He asked, breathing hard. This is good for tonight. We'll push deeper tomorrow. Setting up camp revealed more of Mason's inexperience. While I methodically established our perimeter, food cache hung 12 feet high. Cooking area downwind from sleeping quarters, emergency supplies easily accessible. He struggled with basic tent assembly. Dad, can you help with this? He held up tangled guidelines like surrender flags. Teaching him proper technique felt like old times back when he'd wanted to learn instead of just inherit. But something nagged at me. Why insist on wilderness camping when you couldn't handle basic equipment? Evening campfire cast dancing shadows across our small clearing. I prepared a simple meal while Mason sat unusually quiet, staring into the flames with an expression I couldn't read. The temperature dropped steadily. March nights in Alaska demanded respect. Remember when we used to do this? I tried conversation, hoping to recapture some connection. You were maybe 10, insisted on roasting marshmallows until they caught fire. Mom was still alive then. His voice carried unexpected sadness. She loved our camping trips. Said they brought out the best in people. Mason nodded, but his eyes remained distant. Tell me about your childhood, Dad. Before the military, before the business, what was it like? Being poor? The question surprised me. Mason rarely showed interest in my background. I found myself sharing stories I hadn't told in years. Growing up in rural Montana, working farms. During summer, earning every dollar through sweat and determination. Sounds hard, he said, but his tone suggested calculation rather than sympathy. Hard work built character, taught me the value of earning what you have. Something flickered across his features. Resentment maybe, or frustration, but when he spoke, his voice remained carefully neutral. Lucky for me, right? Getting to skip all that. Character building. The conversation continued around the fire, Mason prompting stories about my military service, survival training, the skills that had kept me alive in hostile environments. I shared more than usual, encouraged by what seemed like genuine interest. How do you know when someone's lying to you? He asked. Suddenly, body language, voice patterns, inconsistencies in their story. I poked the fire, sending sparks spiraling into darkness. Why? Just curious. You've always been good at reading people. Later, as I banked the fire for the night, peaceful silence settled over our campsite. Stars emerged in patterns I hadn't seen since my last deployment, unmarred by city lights. The wilderness felt pristine, untouched, almost sacred. I'll take first watch. Mason volunteered. Not really tired yet. You? Sure? We've got a long day tomorrow. Yeah, I want to enjoy this. Listen to the forest sounds. I crawled into my tent, trusting my son to wake me for the second shift. Through the nylon walls, I could hear him moving around the fire, adding logs, settling into watch position. Normal camping sounds that should have been comforting. But as sleep approached, something bothered me about his offer. In all our conversations, Mason had never shown interest in solitary reflection or nature appreciation. Why start now? The last thing I noticed before exhaustion took over was the change in sounds outside. No more casual movement around the fire, just careful stillness that suggested someone waiting rather than watching. Dawn light filtering through my tent walls brought me to consciousness. Outside, I heard the metallic clanking of equipment being loaded. Too early, too urgent for normal morning preparations. I unzipped the tent flap and stepped into frigid air that made my breath visible in white puffs. Mason stood by our truck, methodically packing gear with military efficiency he'd never displayed before. Every piece of survival equipment, GPS device, emergency beacon, rifle, food containers, disappeared into the vehicle. What's going on? My voice cut through the morning silence. Mason startled, then straightened with defiant posture, getting ready to leave. We planned 3 more days. What's the rush? Change of plans. He avoided my eyes, continuing to load equipment. Weather's turning bad. The lie hung between us like smoke. Yesterday's forecast had been clear, and the sky showed no threatening clouds. My military instincts, dormant since arriving in Alaska, suddenly screamed warnings. Mason, talk to me. What's really happening here? Something snapped in his expression. Years of carefully controlled resentment exploded across his features like a dam bursting. You want to know what's happening? I'm done. Done with your control, your manipulation, your constant judgment. Son, I don't understand. Don't. He wheeled around, fist clenched. Don't call me son. Sons don't get treated like employees. Sons don't have to beg for every dollar while their father sits on millions. The venom in his voice hit me like physical blows. This wasn't momentary anger. This was cultivated hatred festering for years beneath our family's surface. I've given you everything. You've given me nothing. Mason's voice cracked with rage. You made me dependent, kept me weak, controlled every aspect of my life with your checkbook. Well, guess what? I'm taking control now. My hands trembled as understanding dawned. The camping trip. This whole thing was planned. Finally catching on, military genius. His laugh carried no warmth. Took you long enough. Why, Mason? If you needed money, we could have worked something out. I don't want your allowance anymore, Dad. I want what's mine by right. Your business, your assets, everything you've been dangling over my head for decades. The cold morning air seemed to freeze around us. I stared at this stranger wearing my son's face, speaking words that shattered 20 years of paternal love. You're planning to leave me here. Very good. Yes, I'm leaving you here to figure things out for yourself. Maybe 30 miles of wilderness will teach you what real dependence feels like. My chest constricted. Mason, this is bare country without equipment, without GPS. Should have thought about that before you made me into your puppet. He slammed the truck's tailgate shut. Maybe you'll survive. Maybe you won't. Either way, I'll inherit what should have been mine years ago. Please. The word scraped my throat raw. Whatever I did wrong, we can fix it. Don't do this. For a moment, something flickered across his features. Doubt maybe, or remembered affection. Then his expression hardened into something unrecognizable. Goodbye, Dad. He climbed into the driver's seat. Try not to meet the Grizzlies too quickly. I want you to have time to think about what you created. The engine roared to life. I stepped toward the truck, desperate to reason with him, but he threw it in reverse and backed away. Through the windshield, I saw his face, cold, calculated, devoid of any filial emotion. Mason. My shout echoed off distant mountains as the truck disappeared around a bend. The sound of the engine faded gradually, leaving me standing on an empty dirt road in the vast Alaskan wilderness, 30 miles from the nearest human being. Dust settled around my feet. The silence that followed was absolute. No human sounds, no mechanical noise, just the whisper of wind through spruce trees and the distant cry of a hawk. I stood there for a long moment, processing the enormity of what had just happened. My son, the boy I'd raised, protected, provided for, had just sentenced me to death. The dust from Mason's truck still hung in the air when military training kicked in, overriding the emotional devastation. Shock was a luxury I couldn't afford, not 30 miles from civilization in Grizzly country. I forced myself to breathe steadily, letting decades of Navy discipline take control. First rule of survival: assess your resources. I patted down my pockets. Wallet, house keys, a small folding knife I'd forgotten about. No food, no water, no GPS, no emergency beacon, the clothing on my back, and nothing else. Second rule: evaluate the environment. March in Alaska meant temperatures dropping below freezing at night. The terrain around me consisted of dense spruce forest, unmarked trails, and complete isolation. Ranger Walsh's warnings echoed in my memory. Recent grizzly activity, wolf packs, unpredictable weather patterns. Third rule: prioritize survival needs, shelter, water, signaling, navigation. In that order, I studied the sun's position, calculating direction. East led deeper into wilderness. West eventually reached the main park road, though at what distance I couldn't determine. My aging memory summoned fragments of topographical knowledge from the ranger station briefing. River systems flowed generally northwest, toward the park boundary. Movement was critical. Standing still meant death. I began walking west, following the faint tire tracks Mason had left. Within 100 yards, the tracks diverged from what appeared to be an animal trail cutting through the underbrush. Game trails usually led to water sources, essential for survival and potential rescue visibility. Every step required conscious effort. At 58, my knees protested the uneven terrain, and my civilian conditioning was worlds away from my military peak. But anger fueled my movement. Fury at Mason's betrayal, at my own blindness, at the years I'd wasted enabling his transformation into this monster. The forest closed around me like a living tunnel. Massive spruce trees blocked most sunlight, creating a twilight atmosphere, even at midday. I broke branches as I walked, creating crude trail markers for potential rescue teams. though the odds of anyone finding me seemed impossibly remote. Bear sign appeared everywhere. Claw marks on tree, bark, massive paw prints in soft earth, scat that looked disturbingly fresh. I made noise while walking, remembering Ranger Walsh's instructions about avoiding surprise encounters. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had placed me in a situation where bears might be the least of my problems. Hours passed. My mouth grew dry, then parched. The game trail meandered through increasingly dense vegetation, and several times I lost it completely, forced to backtrack and search for the continuation. Exhaustion crept into my legs, but stopping meant losing precious daylight. A distant sound made me freeze. Mechanical, rhythmic, definitely. Human-made engines, multiple engines. I stood perfectly still, listening. The sound came from the north, maybe half a mile away. ATVs or motorcycles moving in. For information. Hunters, park rangers, search and rescue. Hope surged through my chest for the first time since Mason's betrayal. I changed direction, moving toward the mechanical sounds, pushing through undergrowth that tore at my clothing. The sounds grew louder, definitely all-terrain vehicles, and they seemed to be moving slowly, methodically. The forest began to thin, and through the trees I glimpsed a clearing ahead. The engine sounds were closer now, maybe 200 yards away. I moved faster, abandoning stealth for speed, branches whipping across my face as I pressed toward a potential salvation. Breaking through the tree, I stumbled into a clearing where 4 ATV riders had stopped for what appeared to be a lunch break. They looked up in shock as I emerged from the forest, disheveled, scratched, clearly out of place in this remote wilderness. The lead rider, a bearded man in his 40s, with the weathered look of someone who lived outdoors, immediately shut off his engine and approached me with professional concern. "Sir, what happened? Why are you out here alone?" My voice came out hoarse from dehydration and stress. "My son, he left me here, took all our equipment, and drove away." The man's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "Someone abandoned you here? That's attempted murder." "I'm William Harper. My son Mason brought me on a camping trip." Then I struggled to explain the situation without revealing the full extent of family dysfunction. "He took our truck and all our survival gear. Said he was leaving me to die." "Jesus." The bearded man removed his helmet, revealing intelligent eyes that seemed to be assessing my condition and story simultaneously. "I'm Oliver Reed, former park ranger here. These are my friends. We're doing a backcountry tour." The other riders gathered around, their faces showing the horror that outdoor enthusiasts felt when confronting deliberate wilderness abandonment. One of them, a woman in her 30s, handed me a water bottle that I drained gratefully. "How long ago did this happen?" Oliver asked, his tone becoming professional and urgent. "This morning, maybe 4 hours ago." Oliver exchanged glances with his companions. "We need to get you out of here immediately. Radio range is limited, but we can reach the ranger station from higher elevation. There's something else." Oliver continued studying his GPS device. "If your son took the main road out, he's looking at a 6-hour drive minimum to reach Anchorage. But I know a shortcut. Old ranger trail that cuts through the backcountry. We can have you back to the park entrance in 90 minutes. The implication hit me like electricity. "You mean I could get back before him?" "Easily. The question is, do you want to involve law enforcement immediately, or do you have other plans?" Something hard crystallized in my chest, replacing the desperation and fear I'd carried since dawn. Mason had calculated my death, planned my abandonment, counted on my helplessness. He'd made one critical error, underestimating the wilderness, community solidarity, and my own survival instincts. "I want to get back to the motel first," I said carefully, "before I decide anything about police." Oliver nodded, understanding, passing between us. "Climb on behind me. We'll take the ranger trail. Your son will never see us coming." The ATV ride through hidden forest paths revealed a side of Denali I'd never imagined. A network of service trails maintained for emergency access, known only to rangers and serious backcountry guides. OL navigated with the confidence of someone who'd traveled these routes for years. "I spent 15 years as a ranger here," he explained. "Over the engine noise. Sent a lot of stupid decisions, but deliberate abandonment. That's criminal territory." The terrain blurred past, creek crossings, steep inclines, sections where we had to dismount and guide the ATVs around fallen trees. Despite the rough conditions, we made excellent time, emerging onto paved road well ahead of Oliver's estimate. Denali Lodge Motel appeared in the distance, its log cabin architecture looking incredibly welcoming after my morning in the wilderness. As we approached the parking area, I scanned for our rental truck. Not yet returned. Looks like your son's still driving back, Oliver observed. You've got time to prepare whatever reception you're planning. The other riders offered contact information, promising to serve as witnesses if legal proceedings became necessary. Oliver handed me his card inscribed with personal cell and email. Call me when you're ready to talk to authorities. What your son did, there need to be consequences. As they prepared to leave, Oliver paused. Sir, you mind me asking what are you planning to do when he gets back? I looked toward the motel room where our belongings waited, then at the legal documents still folded in my jacket pocket. Mason had spent years planning my destruction. Now it was my turn to plan his. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants, I said quietly, just not the way he expects to get it. Back in our motel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. Oliver's card lay beside me along with his offer to contact authorities immediately. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The legal documents I'd prepared back in Seattle felt prophetic now, folded in my jacket pocket like a loaded weapon. 3 weeks ago, I'd changed my will. In a moment of paternal disappointment. Now that decision looked like divine preparation for war. I spread the papers across the small desk, reviewing the language I'd crafted with my attorney. Mason would inherit nothing. Everything would go to wildlife conservation charities, veterans organizations, and a scholarship fund in Sarah's name. The irony was perfect. My son's attempt to murder me for inheritance would leave him with exactly nothing. But legal documents alone weren't enough. I needed evidence, witnesses, consequences that would follow Mason for the rest of his life. I dialed Oliver's number. He answered on the first ring. William, you settled in? All right. I need your help with something specific. When Mason returns, I want everything documented. His reaction, his words, everything. You planning to confront him before calling police? I'm planning to give him exactly what he thought he wanted, the chance to inherit my business. Right up until the moment he realizes what he's actually done to himself. Silence stretched across the connection. Finally, Oliver spoke. That's strategic. You want me there as witness. If you're willing, and maybe bring that digital camera you had on the trail. Mason's going to say things that should be preserved for a jury. What time you expecting him? I calculated. Mason's route. Main Park Road to Anchorage Highway. Probable stops for gas and food. His tendency to drive cautiously on unfamiliar roads. Between 9 and 10 tonight, he'll be tired, overconfident, expecting to find an empty room and a grieving father who never made it back. Instead, he finds his intended victim very much alive, and very well prepared. After Oliver agreed to arrive by 8:30, I called my attorney in Seattle. The conversation was brief, but crucial. Tomorrow morning, the new will would be filed officially, regardless of tonight's outcome. Mason's inheritance would evaporate the moment legal documents hit the courthouse. Next, I contacted the motel office and arranged for an adjacent room for Oliver. The desk clerk, an elderly woman who'd seen decades of Alaskan drama, asked no questions about the unusual request. Evening approached with surreal calm. I showered off the wilderness grime, changed into clean clothes, and arranged the room methodically. The legal documents spread across the desk where Mason would see them immediately. Oliver's camera would have clear sight. Lines from the adjoining room. My phone was programmed with 911 on speed dial. Military training had taught me that preparation eliminated variables. Tonight, Mason would walk into a controlled environment where every advantage belonged to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had spent months planning my death in the wilderness. Now I was planning his social and financial death in civilization. The difference was that my plan would leave him alive to face consequences. At 8:15, Oliver knocked softly. He entered carrying professional photography equipment and the grim expression of someone who'd seen too many wilderness tragedies. Recording equipment set up in the adjacent room. Audio and video coverage of this entire space. He gestured toward the connecting door. When he arrives, You'll have everything documented. What happens legally when we turn this over to authorities? Attempted murder in the first degree. Alaska takes wilderness abandonment seriously. It's essentially death sentence with extra steps. With your testimony, my witness statement, and whatever he says tonight, he's looking at serious prison time. I nodded, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Then we wait. Outside, darkness gathered around the motel like a closing fist. Through the window, I could see the main road, where Mason's headlights would soon appear, carrying him toward a reckoning he'd never imagined possible. The phone showed 8:47 p.m. Any minute now, my son would discover that his perfect crime had become his perfect downfall. Headlights swept across the parking lot, and I recognized the distinctive sound of our rental truck engine. Mason had returned from his failed murder attempt, probably rehearsing grief-stricken phone calls to report his father's tragic disappearance. I positioned myself in the chair facing the door, legal documents clearly visible on the desk. Through the connecting wall, I heard Oliver adjusting his recording equipment. Everything was ready. Mason's key scraped the lock twice before catching. When the door opened, he stepped inside with the cautious air of someone expecting to find an empty room. The overhead light illuminated his face, and I watched recognition hit him like a physical blow. "Dad," the word came out, strangled, disbelieving. "Hello, son. How was your drive?" His face cycled through confusion, shock, and something approaching terror. How are you here? How did you get back?" "Turns out, I'm harder to kill than you calculated." Mason's legs seemed to buckle slightly. He gripped the door frame, eyes darting around the room as if searching for escape routes. "I don't understand. I left you 30 miles from nowhere, without food, water, or equipment." "Yes, I remember." I kept my voice conversational, almost friendly. "Interesting choice of last words, by the way. Go meet the Grizzlies." Really captured the sentiment beautifully. "Dad, wait. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly. You brought me to Alaska to murder me for my inheritance. Spent months planning it, researched the most remote location possible, even practiced your shock son routine for when the authorities found my body." Mason's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Sweat beat on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "The problem with your plan," I continued, standing slowly, "is that you underestimated the wilderness community. Turns out there are people who actually help each other survive instead of abandoning family members to die. Look, if this is about money, it was always about money for you. That's what I finally understand. Every conversation, every camping trip, every moment of what I thought was father-son bonding. You were just calculating my net worth." I walked to the desk and picked up the legal documents. "You want to know what's fascinating? 3 weeks ago, right after our fight, I changed my will. Called it paternal disappointment at the time." Mason's eyes locked onto the papers in my hands. "What do you mean changed?" "I mean, you inherit nothing. Not the auto shops, not the bank accounts, not the house your mother loved. Everything goes to charity, wildlife conservation, veterans organizations, scholarship funds." The color drained from his face completely. "You can't do that. I'm your son. You were my son. This morning you became something else entirely. A man who calculated his father's death for financial gain." "Dad, please, if you'll just listen." "I listened this morning while you explained how my controlling behavior ruined your life. I listened when you said I deserved to die alone in bear country. I'm done listening." Mason's composure cracked completely. "You self-righteous bastard. You created this. Your constant control, your manipulation, keeping me dependent while judging every choice I made. There it is. The real Mason Harper. You want to destroy me? Fine. But remember, you made me into this. Every dollar you dangled, every condition you attached, every way you controlled my life. This is your creation." I felt a strange calm settle over me. "You're absolutely right. I did create this. I enabled your dependence, bought your affection, confused providing with parenting. That's my failure as a father. Then changed the will back. Fix this. The will was filed this afternoon. It's done." I walked toward the door, past my son, who looked smaller, somehow diminished. "But you're wrong about one thing. I didn't create your willingness to commit murder. That choice was entirely yours." Mason's voice cracked. "Where are you going?" "To call the police." Attempted murder is still a felony, even when it fails. Dad, wait. I paused at the threshold. Goodbye, Mason. In a strange way, you've given me exactly what I needed. Absolute clarity. About who you really are. The last thing I saw before stepping outside was my son, collapsing into the chair I'd vacated, staring at the legal documents that represented the complete destruction of everything he'd tried to gain through my death. The fluorescent lights in the Anchorage Police Department interview room buzzed overhead as Detective Sarah Martinez reviewed the evidence spread. Across the metal table, Oliver's digital recordings, my sworn statement, and Mason's own recorded confession from the motel room created an overwhelming case. Mr. Harper, I've been investigating wilderness crimes for 8 years. This is the most premeditated case of attempted murder I've encountered. Detective Martinez clicked through the audio recordings on her laptop. Your son's statements are remarkably incriminating. He always was thorough when he wanted something. The district attorney will file charges this morning. Attempted murder in the first degree, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit fraud regarding your inheritance. Alaska doesn't treat wilderness abandonment lightly. Through the interview room window, I could see Mason in handcuffs being processed at the booking desk. Overnight in jail had stripped away his last pretenses. No more manipulation, no more charm, just a 28-year-old man facing the consequences of calculated evil. Oliver sat beside me, having driven down from Denali to provide his witness testimony. What's the likely sentence for this kind of crime? 15 to 25 years, depending on plea negotiations. Alaska views deliberate wilderness abandonment as equivalent to attempted murder because that's exactly what it is. I watched my son through the glass, feeling an unexpected absence of satisfaction. This wasn't victory. It was just the natural endpoint of choices he'd made over years of increasing entitlement and resentment. Will you be returning to Seattle today? Detective Martinez asked. Tomorrow. I need to visit my attorney here first. Finalize some estate planning documents. The detective nodded knowingly, making sure your new will is completely secure. Among other things, I stood, gathering my jacket and the evidence folders. I'm establishing a foundation in my late wife's name. Seems appropriate that Mason's inheritance should help people who actually deserve assistance. Oliver. And I walked out of the police station into crisp Anchorage morning air. Downtown traffic moved with typical Alaska pace, unhurried, practical, purposeful. What happens now? Oliver asked. Back to your business in Seattle. Back to figuring out what kind of man I want to be in whatever years I have left. I looked up at the Chugach Mountains rising beyond the city skyline. Turns out surviving your own child's murder attempt gives you remarkable clarity about priorities. You planning to visit him during the trial? The question caught me off guard. I considered it seriously. The paternal instinct to maintain connection wearing against the reality of what Mason had attempted. No, the man I raised died somewhere in those woods yesterday morning. What's left isn't my son anymore. We reached Oliver's truck in the parking lot. He handed me a business card with his personal information. If you ever want to come back to Alaska for the right reasons, camping, fishing, actually enjoying the wilderness, call me. First trips on the house. Why would you do that? Because you survived something that should have killed you. And instead of letting it make you bitter, you're using it to help other people. That's worth supporting. I shook his hand, feeling genuine gratitude for this stranger who'd become an unlikely ally. Thank you for everything. Thank the wilderness community. We look out for each other up here. As Oliver drove away, I pulled out my phone and dialed my attorney in Seattle. There were foundations to establish, scholarships to fund, a lifetime of enabling to undo through positive action. Mason had brought me to Alaska to die for money. Instead, I'd learned to live for purpose. In trying to destroy me, he'd accidentally taught me the difference between providing for someone and actually caring about them. The irony was perfect and perfectly just. 3 days later, back in Seattle, I received a letter from Mason in jail. 5 pages of manipulation disguised as apology, promising change if I just reconsider the inheritance, explaining how prison would ruin his life. I read it once, then fed it through my office shredder. Some relationships don't survive attempted murder, no matter how much money you've invested in them. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and Share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Reconsider the inheritance, explaining how prison would ruin his life. I read it once, then fed it through my office shredder. Some relationships don't survive attempted murder, no matter how much money you've invested in them. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.